1,000 years ago, the people of the town we call Kolomoki held an important ceremony and built a mound to memorialize the event. You are now at the edge of that mound. This mound is just one part of the story at Kolomoki. The Indians who lived here were an element in the broad and evolving pattern that spread across the southeast. This program will tell you about the Kolomoki culture and the story of this mound. The study of prehistoric archaeological sites in the region has led scientists to several conclusions about the site. It's believed that Kolomoki was the central town of an affiliation that covered southwest Georgia. Identical pottery has been found at several smaller towns and villages. Of these associated towns, only Kolomoki had large public structures, including mounds and a plaza, and some indications of a surrounding palisade or wall. Studies have also shown how southeastern Indians changed through time and how cultures varied from place to place. Scientists have learned how Indians obtained food, what kinds of houses they occupied, and the way they treated those who died. They learned that rectangular flat-top mounds are a widespread type of structure in the New World. In the southeast, such mounds were built from around 500 AD until the arrival of Europeans in the 16th century. The size of the Kolomoki site and the large mounds and other public works that required a large population laboring under strict supervision argue for a settled community supported by a stable food supply. Such a food supply had to be based upon farming. Southeastern Indians used the hoe to raise beans, maize, and squashes. These crops were domesticated in Mexico, and their cultivation had spread to this area by the time Kolomoki came into existence. Other crops were raised, and the Kolomoki people gathered food from the nearby forests. Wild plant foods, including acorns, hickory nuts, black walnuts, grapes, persimmons, and wild plums were important food resources. Hunting and fishing also supplied food for the Kolomoki people. Excavations indicated that white-tailed deer and wild turkey were the most frequently killed species. Raccoons, opossums, and bears were taken less often. Fish and local freshwater turtles and clams were also important. The storage, preparation, and serving of these foods required containers. Fortunately for archaeologists, these containers were often pottery that lasts indefinitely in the ground. These ceramics tell us a great deal about day-to-day life at Kolomoki. Trade and other kinds of social relationships between Kolomoki and groups beyond Kolomoki's political authority were extensive and important. Pottery types similar to Kolomoki's have been found down the Chattahoochee and Apalachicola rivers and along the Gulf Coast of northwest Florida. Domestic pottery types used on a day-to-day basis were not found in wide distribution. This suggests that Kolomoki's influence with a larger region was more important in religious affairs. The ceremonial pottery found at Kolomoki is in a style tradition called Weeden Island. The mortuary pottery is much more elaborate than the domestic. Designs were either geometric or taken from nature. Some shapes are so elaborate that their use in household tasks is unlikely, even impossible. These elaborate ceramics were found in Mound D, which is 300 yards east of the museum. Mound D and Mound E, in front of you, were burial mounds. The study of burial mounds and practices is important. The manner in which a person is treated in death reflects how they were treated in life. Thus, a close study of information from these mounds, plus the limited testing in the village and from excavations of similar sites, allows us to reconstruct Kolomoki culture in some detail. Kolomoki society was characterized by a system of ranking. The uppermost rank was that of the paramount chief, while others were ranked according to their kin relationship to the chief. The closer their kinship, the higher their rank. The chief and his close kin controlled the distribution of exotic raw materials and craft goods, such as copper, meteoric iron, marine shells, and pottery vessels. These goods came to Kolomoki from widely separated areas of the eastern United States. The high-status kin group also lived in special places. Their houses were focal points within the village and often on mounds. This group also received special mortuary treatment similar to what a president or cabinet member does today. Arlington National Cemetery in Washington is a special place for burials for Americans, and Mound E was a special place at Kolomoki. The practice of mound burials is a very old one in the Southeast. It had been going on for about 500 years when the town of Kolomoki was established. The ceremony that took place at the mound in front of you was a great event in the history of Kolomoki. It occurred centuries before Columbus found his way to the New World. The death of the chief buried here triggered a sequence of rituals led by the new leader that served to reassure Kolomoki society that it would continue in spite of the death of its leader. Dr. William H. Sears excavated this mound in 1949. His careful removal of the clay mound cap and meticulous observations and data records allowed him to reconstruct the sequence of events that led to the creation of this mound. Let's look at what Dr. Sears found. When the Kolomoki leader died, the surface of the ground where his tomb was to be built was carefully cleared. His body was cremated, probably on this patch of burned clay. Next, the members of the town dug a pit 7 feet deep that tapered from 9 feet square at the top to 6 feet at the bottom. Into this pit went the ashes of the leader, along with 2 disc-shaped copper ear ornaments set with pearls and hundreds of conch shell beads that were originally in strands or sewn onto clothing. The lower portion of the pit was then filled with rocks, the first weighing over 1 ton. Burials 2 and 3 were then placed on the slopes of the pit with their heads to the east. Burial 4 was placed about 8 feet from the edge of the pit. The fact that each wore shell beads indicates they were high-status individuals. Dr. Sears suggests that they might have been deliberately killed as part of the ritual to honor the dead chief. The pit was filled, and a skull with a lower jaw missing was placed near the top of the pit. A final skull with a copper ornament in the hair was placed upon the primary mound. These skulls might have been trophies taken in warfare. Thousands of basket loads of clay were then brought to start building the mound. The first phase, or primary mound, was 5 feet high and covered the pit tomb, the sacrificed men, and the first trophy skull. Large rocks were then placed over the primary mound. Portions of this layer of rocks can still be seen encircling the pit tomb and in the face of the mound. 5 special mortuary pots were then placed at the eastern edge of the mound. This was all covered with clay, and the final trophy skull was placed on top. Then, in a solemn procession like the one portrayed in the exhibit hall for Mound D, over 50 special mortuary vessels were brought and placed on the eastern edge of the mound. Many of these vessels were unbroken when they were first placed in here. However, earth pressure has broken many of the pots. Most of the pots had holes in the bases, making them unsuitable for use except for ritual purposes. Unfortunately, many of the vessels from Mound E and the magnificent effigy vessels from Mound D were stolen from this museum in 1974. The final act of the burial ceremony was the addition of the final layer of sandy clay with some sandstone rocks for fill. The final mound was 11 feet high and stretched from the edge of this platform 80 feet to the west. We invite you to tour the excavated tomb and memorial of a great and powerful leader. Reproductions of bones have replaced the original skeletal remains in the places where Dr. Sears found them in 1949. The original remains have been carefully reburied in the undisturbed portion of Mound E.